Okay, so we will start on our introductions now of the panelists. So first we have Belinda Talania, and she was born in Provo, Utah in 1976, but her story begins far before her birth. Her grandparents immigrated to Provo, Utah in 1962. Her mother was 13 years old, and the family came to Utah to run and operate El Azteca, which was the first Mexican restaurant in Utah County. Here she learned the importance of doing your best work, having integrity, and serving others. She began her career in education as a substitute teacher at Provo High and then an advocate at Dixon Middle School. She did an internship at Dixon Middle School as a teacher and was then hired full-time. In 2009, she transferred to Mountain View High School and taught for 2 years. After finishing her master's degree, she was hired as an assistant principal at Mountain View and served until May 2019. Belinda's next chapter took her to Orem Junior High, where she's the first Latina secondary principal in Alpine School District. Belinda also participates in different capacities in organizations that promote educational experience for minoritized students and their families. Currently, she is the past president of the Utah chapter of the National Association for Multicultural Organization. She is also a board member of the Intermountain Healthcare Utah Valley Governing Board, which oversees 5 hospitals in Utah County. Belinda married Adrian Talania, and they have 3 beautiful children, Vanessa, age 9, Ashley, age 7, and Audrey, age 2. In her free time, she enjoys reading, participating in Twitter educhats, gardening, and being with friends and family.
Our next panelist is Ana Rojas. Ana Rojas is currently the assistant principal at Geneva Suncrest Consolidation School in Orem after having taught for 13 years. Anna's parents immigrated to California from Mexico, and Anna attended school as an English language learner and went on to receive an undergraduate and graduate degrees at UVU with an emphasis in ESL. Anna is passionate about educational equity and a true believer that all kids can learn at high levels. Anna received her leadership administration degree from BYU and is a member of Educational Equity Leadership Team for Alpine School District and is a part of the first administrator cohort to attend Alpine School District's Leadership Academy. She has received a number of awards, including Outstanding Teacher Award in 2014, Outstanding Administrator in 2019, and Utah PTA's Advocacy Award in 2021. She lives in Orem with her husband and 2 of her 3 lovely children and enjoys going on walks, traveling, and spending time with her family.
Our last panelist is Momi Tua, and she grew up in Molokai, Hawaii with 4 siblings where her parents were educators both at elementary and high school levels. After the untimely death of her father at age 38 years of age, her mother uprooted the family and moved to Utah to pursue her master's degree in education administration, known today as educational leadership at BYU. Momi graduated from BYU in athletic training, thinking she would work at the college level, but marriage and having 4 boys in 5 years thwarted her plan, and it was for the better. Momi's route to become an assistant principal at Timpview High School was unconventional by way of academic advising at a youth treatment center, getting her master's degree in educational counseling, working in high schools, serving as a counselor, and then the equity specialist at the Utah State Education. Sorry, I don't know why the slides are, but pursuing her educational leadership. Sorry, one second. And then the equity specialist at the Utah State Board of Education, pursuing her educational leadership license through BYU, which in the end has brought her full circle to what she enjoys the most, serving students and families in a high school setting. Momi and Charles are practically empty nesters, but have their doors open to friends and family to visit or stay a few months. Their family continues to grow with a son and daughters-in-law. Their 1 granddaughter is the apple of their eye, and their grand dog isn't too far behind. So before we get into the questions as well, I just want to thank those who submitted questions. We had a lot of questions that were submitted, and so we won't be able to get to all of them. But again, I want to thank the panelists, and I'm excited to learn from all of you. So the first question we have is, how can an administrator set the example to his or her staff members on hard subjects brought up in a school like racism, homophobia, and politics? And we have all the slides, we have all the questions on these slides, and the panelists feel free after we ask the question to chime in with all your thoughts that you have.
I can start. Is that okay?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. I think what's really important here is just identifying your own biases, right? When you're going into your staff is knowing, what are those biases that I may have, and kind of setting that example with your staff, right? Having them check their biases. But I also think it's really important that you have the best interest. So if you are talking about multicultural students and you don't have any multicultural people in the room that can represent those students, I think you need to stop and say, you know what, maybe I should have somebody in here when we're talking about these things. And I think obviously, setting an example of thinking that if you are going to hire people that are of color, that you really do value what they have to offer, that they're just not being tokenized, right? We don't want just someone to be hired because they're brown. We want to hire someone who is brown that has a lot to offer to our school. And hopefully if your staff is seeing that you value these things, then they'll start to value those things.
Yeah, I wanted to chime in. I'm sorry, I look like I have a halo above me.
So do I.
I agree with what you're saying, that we, even our training with our staff and talking about hidden biases, sometimes that elicits an emotional response. So it takes the boldness of administrators and leadership to bring these subjects to light, because once we see or we can identify our own hidden biases and see that others have it, we're in a comfortable space that allows us to feel less vulnerable. In reference to, also prioritizing looking at highly qualified people of color to join your team at your school is really important. That's something that our principal Fidel Montero has openly expressed. And you can see a representation of our people of color in different areas of our school. So that's something that even our students can see, and that's something that is a readily visible, safe place for them to go to.
That's great. I would add that I've thought about this often in my own practice, and there are 3 C's that I kind of go back to that as I'm mentoring others, I ask them to consider and to remember. The first one is how important it is to be caring. We need to make sure that as we're working through these difficult and triggering subjects for some people, that we are caring, that we're validating, that we're listening, whether it's triggering or whether it's because they're experiencing some of the backlash, right? We just need to be more open-minded and supportive as we're leading out of school. Also, the next C then is competent. It's okay to say that if we don't know something, but as leaders and as educators, we need to make sure that we're investing the time to be competent, because the time will come when we will be faced with these issues. And if we don't know, then we need to take the time to develop those competencies. So part of that is what my colleagues have already talked about in just checking our own biases and making sure that we're checking our own and considering how we can create those spaces where others can be checked as well. And then the last one, I think both of my colleagues have already spoken to this, but this is a work of courage. And it's important to have courage because sometimes we are the only ones sitting in the room. And sometimes things are said, and if we don't have the courage to take them head on, then the abuses and the mistreatment continues to happen for our students. And so this is a work of courage, it's a work of heart, and we just need to be willing to put that work in.
Thank you so much. Our next question is, what suggestions do you have in navigating uncomfortable questions and comments regarding your race or culture in the workplace by teachers and other staff?
Okay, since I'm on a roll with C's, I'm going to give one more. And this one is confidence. You just need to have confidence in yourself. And this one's hard because when you're facing microaggressions day after day, or when you're facing biases, others' biases, whether they're explicit or implicit, or implicit and explicit, I should say, it's hard to have confidence. It can wear on you. Like racial battle fatigue is real, and it can be tiring. But in order to navigate some of these uncomfortable questions, I think, and comments, and specifically towards myself as the leader, I think that we just have to have confidence, and we have to let people get to know us from multiple facets and build trust, so that they can see us as a whole person instead of just one facet of our person. And it's much easier said than done with some people. Some people will be accepting of us, and that's just the way life is. And others we're really going to have to work for to kind of gain some traction and confidence with, and others we just aren't ever going to win, and that's okay too. As long as there's dignity and respect in play, then we don't I don't have to be friends with all of my teachers. I'll be friendly and I'll work with them, and I hope that they'll work with me, because that's what's best for students. So I would say just really have confidence in who you are.
Can I add to that? Since you're on a roll here, Belinda, with the C's, I did write down making connections. And it's really, I would say, it's important to be authentic as a leader, making connections with people so that when you engage in a critical conversation such as this, then you've already have some level of trust where you can address something head on. So I'm going to share, there's an example that I wanted to share with you that took place, I would say about 10, 11 years ago. And a person had made a comment in not hiring the next secretary for our office based on her race. And I kind of looked around to my colleagues, and it was in a professional setting that I felt really uncomfortable, and my heart was beating. And I didn't say anything at that point. And I was really upset at myself for not having said anything, but the opportunity arose again, and it was expressed again in a setting where I couldn't close my mouth anymore. But instead of saying it in the group, I went to this person and closed the office door and had a heart-to-heart conversation. And because we had established a relationship prior to her what she was expressing, we did come to tears at a point in our conversation, but we came out of that with a greater regard for each other and a greater sensitivity for what we say and what we don't say and why that is that way. And so, I feel like it's important, at some level, like Belinda's saying, it's not that we are like this with every faculty and staff member, but somehow as a leader, we make those connections. We are authentic in our work, so that when we have those critical conversations, we are coming from a space of authenticity still, and still address the issue at hand.
Thank you. I was just gonna, I mean, you guys pretty much said it perfectly. The only thing that I would add to it is just sometimes people just they need some form of understanding. Like their comments are not based on hate towards someone, is they just really don't know. So sometimes just explaining like, hey, that comment is really hurtful, just like you did, or just telling them why, like, why would that be hurtful? I had somebody in one of our SEC meetings say that a lot of people in our neighborhood leave because there's too many Mexicans in our school. And I'm sitting right there in the room and, just kind of asking them like, well, why would they leave? I mean, what is it about Mexicans that are making them leave? And one of them, the lady said, well, it's because they take up too much time. Like they're taking up too much time. And I turned around and I said, well, if you mean like ESL strategies, they're actually great for all kids. So just trying to explain to them that it's not a bad thing. I think they see it as a bad thing and not necessarily like sometimes they're just speaking out of ignorance, like not really knowing. But if we can explain it to them, and just like Belinda said, it does wear on you. It starts to wear on you. You're like, I can't be the only one that like always speaks up every time there's a comment about Hispanics or minorities in general. It is really wearing, but then there's days that I go home and I'm like, oh, I can't even comment on that. Like that comment is so far out that I'm just gonna like let it roll off and pretend I never heard it. And then there's days where I'm like, this is the hill I'm gonna die on, yes, and I'm gonna answer that question and I'm gonna tell you why. So it just like varies, but it's true. It is tiring. And it is like a lot. Like it's a lot to bear for minority educators, minority leaders. It's a lot for everyone that's trying to represent in a way.
So I want to add one more thing. I know that we've already gone through it before, because I think this is so crucial. And I'm looking at Anna and I'm looking at Momi, two incredible women who have mentored me and have been my thought partners for so many years. It is so important that when you're navigating these uncomfortable conversations, that you have a thought partner, that you have someone that you can talk to, that you can kind of just be yourself with, and that you can find that safe space and brave space with without having to explain and saying, hey, I just encountered this and this is the way I'm thinking of moving forward, and having someone just kind of say, yeah, that's a good way to move forward, or you know what, in my experience that hasn't turned out so well. And just having that thought partner, I highly recommend that we try to find those opportunities to support each other.
Okay, thank you. And then what is decolonizing education and how can we implement it in schools, in the classroom, or as a school in a whole?
Express it in this context, I can't help but look at, systems that create obstacles for our students that are culturally responsive to the majority, but not necessarily to other students, right? So, it's looking at policies, our policies and practices. Why is it that we don't see representation of students in a particular class? And what are the barriers, even a K-12 sort of alignment, what are the barriers that prohibit these students from accessing high level classes? And you really looking at, for instance, at a high school level, what are the prerequisites and why are they there? Is it to eliminate students? And we have to have those conversations, right? So it's looking at our policies and practices where, and also, asking our families, what are they experiencing in not being able to access these classes, and having those conversations with our teachers, with our counselors, and changing even our course descriptions and our requirements to not prerequisites, but our summer work that teachers require of some of our students, is that pulling them, our students of color away, or even low-income students away from being able to access these classes.
I think that's perfect. And I also think that, just adding, I think a lot of the times we put up posters or we do something and then we're like, okay, check, like we've, all our minority students, like we've represented, but really it's a lot deeper than that. Like, are we really taking into account our Spanish speaking parents and doing things differently? Are we taking into account the data of, the student referrals and how many kids have a SPED, and looking at all of that information? It's not just like a box we're checking and we're saying, well, you know what, we had a Cinco de Mayo celebration, so I'm good. No, it's not just about the cover. It's about the whole story that we're trying to tell. And one of the things that I do personally is I try to educate myself, even if I am a minority, I don't know it all. And I think one of the biggest things is I try to look for books that actually are written by other minorities. And I think it just paints a different perspective. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of books and a lot of movies and a lot of things that you can find that are not written by other minorities about minorities. And it's just painting that different picture. So I think in order for you to really get the right picture of what a minority is going through and really changing your mindset is to go straight to the resources of those things.
Great comments by both of my colleagues. And I just realized right now that Ana represents elementary, I'm at the junior high, and Momi is at the high school. So we're a great K-12 perspective here. And that's a shout out to your organizers for finding the three of us, because there's not very many of us to find. But I would say decolonizing education. So there's a few things that are coming to my mind, but I think the one thing that I would try to emphasize that hasn't been emphasized already, because I totally agree, it's about systems, it's about removing barriers, it's about educating ourselves, bringing to light. So I think the one thing that I would really put emphasis on would be um, making and ensuring that your culture and your climate is asset based, because too often we're expecting students to conform to a certain to certain rules or policies that are best for the majority, but and no buts, and we're not taking into account the assets that other students bring with them, the positive things that they bring from their culture that would also be great for the majority to learn, right? So having that asset based lens as you're looking at your policies and ensuring that just I often ask myself, if we move this forward, who will win and who will not win, who will lose, who is going to have control of this and who's not going to have control in this, what resources, if I give these resources here, who will not receive resources that needs it perhaps more in a different way, right? Because we're looking at equity instead of equal. And so just trying to consider the asset based and considering the needs of what's really happening in your culture and your climate.
Awesome, thank you. And the next question is, how may we approach racial issues or topics in a way that is respectful?
I think I don't have a lot to say on this one, but I just think coming from a place of understanding really goes a long way. Just like Momi said, that connection that you're making with people, and you're really trying to understand where they're coming from and you're trying to educate them. So I think if you approach a situation that can be uncomfortable in a way of, we always say, let's give them the benefit of the doubt, assume goodwill. Well, this is exactly what we're doing. I mean, unfortunately, minority people have to do it way more often than people who are not minority. We always have to assume goodwill, but really it has to come from a place of, okay, let me try to understand where you're coming from and, go from there.
I would echo the same thing. Just it's difficult to it's difficult to maintain your cool and your calm, but in order to really be able to have people listen to you, you need to be able to do it in a respectful manner, right? And I think that it's important for us to something that Anna said earlier, right? Like kind of consider what hill am I going to die on? Because some battles are worth the fight, especially if they impact students directly. It's worth the fight. but other battles are not really our battles to fight. Racial and equity work in general is an individual journey. And so that's something that I have to remind myself often of is, Belinda, you're in a different place in your journey than other people might be. And so have some patience with them, have some grace with them, um, open your mind and try to help them see and help them understand what your experience or what your understanding is, but always do that with love and with light, because if we return it with hate and with darkness, then we will lose the battle. We will not move the equitable work that we're trying to approach forward.
Awesome, thank you. And then our next question is, how do we teach our students and teachers in this and other teachers in this circumstance about racism?
I'm taking a deep breath here because
Mm-hmm.
understanding your community, your school community, and issues surrounding, that's happening in our world today, you could trigger a lot of responses. And if, that one, I would say is a difficult one to spontaneously talk about. But when there are issues that impact our students and our teachers, and I don't know, this one's a tough one for me. I read this question, and our community, where we work, I don't know if you ladies experience that in Alpine School District, but it elicits a response of our majority in a way that if we're not prepared to respond to them, it can trigger things that go up the flagpole to our superintendent, to board members, and so on and so forth. So, bringing it into context of a current situation and addressing it is I feel our responsibility to do that. We need to wait for those opportunities to happen in order to talk about racism. Am I making sense here?
Yeah, I think it's super important that you understand your policies and you understand your audience, right? Because you, at the end of the day, as passionate as we are about education and as passionate as we are about equity and social justice, at the end of the day, I need to keep my job because my family likes to eat. My children like a house over their head. And I have to remember and kind of walk away from some of these battles that we were talking about earlier. And so sometimes we can teach. So I'd like to rephrase the question, maybe instead of how do we teach our students about racism, which I don't think is a bad thing to do, but maybe how do we teach our students about, or how to be anti-racist, or how do we teach our children to be advocates for themselves, or how do we teach our students to be kind to each other, and kind of going about it in that way. I know that we have some of our teachers in my junior high who do a social justice unit, but they don't call it social justice because calling it social justice will elicit that response immediately, right?
Yeah.
So they call it something like the current event, and they really they've said to me, we don't like whitewashing it to not elicit that response, but they know that it's it's better to make that kind of modification so that they can teach some social justice issues and can make um, some movement in teaching students how to advocate for themselves than to not teach anything at all, right? And so sometimes you have to look at your policies, look at your audience. Um, as future teachers, I would say you really need to know what your administration is going to support. And not everyone has an administration with a person of color on it. And so you might get some pushback. So you need to be really solid on why you're moving forward. Make sure that it's tied to your state core, and that you can justify why you're moving in that direction. So there's a lot of different angles to kind of consider as we're moving forward with teaching our students to be anti-racist.
I was just thinking about the trigger words that you guys were using. And if you want 2 trigger words that will elicit some response, it's racism and equity. For some reason, those things are really hard for people and they feel like it means something that it may not even mean. I think, how do we teach our students about racism? I mean, maybe exposing them to different cultures. I think a lot of the times they're in schools where they don't see anyone who's a minority. And I understand Belinda and I and Momi, we're all in schools that have a high population of minority students. And it makes sense to have someone of color to be in these schools representing our students. I think that's perfect. But I also think it's really important for minority people to be in all schools, because I think we're kind of perpetuating the problem if we don't have people of color in other schools, because people aren't seeing that, a principal could be someone who's brown. And when a lot of these students grow up and they become leaders themselves and they're out there hiring, they don't think that minority people they can't be in these positions of power. I don't know if we'd call it that, but positions of like a principal or an assistant principal or a teacher, we see them as a kitchen staff, custodials, because that's what they're used to seeing. So I think it's really important that we try to change. We add more minorities in all the school system, but I do think it's a start to put us in these high impacted schools. I would agree with that. Another thing is not allowing, like if you see racist remarks, I think it's so important and it's so uncomfortable, because I can tell you, if you have a racist student, most likely, and I'm not going to say a racist student, if you have a student who's feels really strongly about what he believes, 99% of the time, their parents are also going to feel really passionate about what that student did. So when you bring them in and they've done something, here's an example. My son he used to play basketball in high school, and they were at a basketball game and they were playing Juan Diego High School. It's a Catholic school. And I wasn't there. My son was playing. My daughter was in the audience. And my daughter ended up calling me. She was so upset about the stuff that the people were saying in the audience. They were making the cross sign. They were looking up and pretending they were going to be praying. They were calling the player's father, and they would have a girl pass by, they'd call her a nun. If you're seeing these things, it's so important for you to put a stop on that and say, that is not tolerated. We're not going to tolerate you talking about someone's religion, someone's color of their skin, their racial, whatever it may be. We're not going to tolerate that. And yes, those are uncomfortable conversations to have with parents. And I'm sure my colleagues here have had those before, and they are uncomfortable. But I think they're also very necessary to help students realize, like, this isn't okay to say, and we're not going to allow you to say this at school. Sorry, I took that different than my other 2 colleagues.
That was also great. And thank you. Our next question is, what are some good resources to use or get supplies from to create a more multicultural school or classroom?
While somebody else is talking, I'm going to put some links in the chat if that's okay. I want to send you to 2 websites. One is the Utah name. I realize that my bio is misstated, but the Utah name is the Utah chapter of the National Association for Multicultural Education. We just had our yearly conference. It's a conference that we have every year, and so I would send you to that, and then also Teaching for Tolerance, which is now Learning for Justice, has incredible webinars, resources. Most of them are free. So that's where I would send you.
I would send my teachers, if they had any questions, to Lee and Lowe. Those are the books that I was talking about. They're all written and published by minorities themselves, and all of them are great. You can go on there and find books for all grades, even high school. There's readers, and I also put the link in there, but that's just a place. But I think Belinda mentioned some great ones too.
There's an article too, what anti-racist educators do differently. It's something that we have shared with our building leadership as a, a beginning point in this regard, and I will share that in the chat as well.
There are lots of great TED Talks also. Zaretta Hammond is one an author who speaks about culturally responsive teaching and the brain. And I love her connection to how being culturally responsive actually feeds the brain and helps the brain be in a safe place to be able to learn. So that's another one. And there's another TED Talk, and I am not going to remember her name right now, but I will try to remember as we're going, and then I'll put it in the chat. Oh, I would also add, if you probably aren't connected with EL, Educational Leader magazine. Educational leadership has a full cover this month. I'll put this, it's by the ASCD on equity. Highly recommend all the articles in that publication as well. Oh, yes, The Danger of a Single Story is a great TED Talk. I would agree.
I'm going to have to listen to some of these. You guys are coming up with some great ones that I haven't seen, so that's great.
Thank you for all those resources. Our next question is, how does multicultural education look from an administrative standpoint?
If you go to the utahname.org and listen to Dr. Erica Turner, she was our keynote speaker. I think she does a great job in making sure and addressing, managerial color blindness. And she talks about to the point of how it's important that educational leaders aren't colorblind as they're managing things, that they're considering everyone's perspective, and that they're considering how to support multicultural education. So I think that some of my colleagues have already spoken to this, like the efforts that Dr. Fidel Montero is doing at his school of hiring and openly hiring diverse educators and diverse staff members from all over, all over throughout his school, I should say. And I think also supporting multicultural parents and families' needs. I've been trying to do something this last few months in making sure that we have family engagement. So we just opened a family engagement center that provides not only food and a pantry and some clothes, but also provides a space for parents to come in and to receive resources and training, and looking at parent engagement from a place of what kind of a skill or disposition can parents learn to help support their students and to work with us as a school, instead of us talking to parents and telling them what they need to do, right? How can we work together? And so those are some things that I think a multicultural perspective might bring to the table, that as we're looking at an administrative standpoint, we're looking at the needs of our faculty and staff, the needs of our students, and the needs of our families.
I think that was perfect. I'm
Yeah.
not even sure if I have more to add to that. Actually, I do think the parent piece is so important, because if you can educate parents on, and it's not conforming them to what our school system is, but it's letting them know how the school system works, really. And if you can do that, it gives those parents an empowerment, and students see that, their children see that, and then it makes them more involved. They want to be involved. So I feel like getting that parent involvement and finding different ways. Like I know Giovanni, he's also a minority educator who is the principal of Suncrest, but he started something at Suncrest called Involucrate, which means get involved. And I'm so intrigued, and I can't wait to actually do that now. Giovanni's now gone, but I hope that I can continue to do.
Where did he go? Sorry.
Well, right now he's with Belinda sharing a room there, but he's actually going to be opening up his new school in Vineyard. We're calling it the Other Vineyard School right now, but it eventually will have a name. I think them and us were both submitting names for our schools tonight. So
Wow.
yeah,
Probably happening.
It's getting parents involved. Say that again.
It's probably happening as we speak.
I know, right? I think it is. Yeah.
Fidel gave us the charge to use the design thinking sort of model in going into our multicultural families and groups and getting feedback as to what they see that their needs are, and designing. We just started up in January where we have designed certain presentations about access and increasing the knowledge of our parents in a way that they are asking us to provide. And it's something as could be as simple as learning how to navigate spaces, just like what was Anna said earlier. You know, it's not necessarily conforming to a system, but giving information about how the system is and how they can access that. We had parents say, you know, we are literate in our language and we can write in our language, but to have to translate, that's difficult for us. So on our end, we did a in-service training with our teachers in how they can translate emails that our parents are writing to us in their home language, and understanding what they're saying and then responding to them, translating it back to their language and responding to them. So, you know, it's that understanding what the needs of the families are and seeing what we can do to change our practice both ways.
Awesome, thank you. Our next question is, how do you help students and teachers who come from a more sheltered background understand people from other backgrounds?
I think it's important to have representation throughout your school, right? I mean, we talked about the teachers. I feel like having teachers, other teachers that can speak, other minorities that can speak to our students, I think that's important. But also, you know, why not celebrate Dia del Niño or whatever it is? I mean, those are all fun traditions that I can learn from other cultures, but it is important to try, if you're going to include one culture, that you try to include at least 3 or 4 other cultures um, that are the majority at your school. We want to make sure that no one is feeling left out or we're feeling like we're only focusing on one group of people.
So, this has been really hard during COVID, but I don't think that there is anything better than getting to know somebody else than breaking bread with them, literally and figuratively. So, anytime that we can spend authentic downtime just getting to know each other, and just sitting down from another and having a meal or sharing a treat or anything where we can just talk, I think it just goes such a long way to see people for who they really are, and gives people an opportunity to authentically be themselves without any pressure of having to be something else.
I think also looking at your student leadership and, you know, diversifying representation in student leadership, they have opportunities to have rich conversations. And, you know, guiding your advisor over student government in asking the questions. You know, student government creates activities and it's supposed to be for all students. What are you seeing? Who are you seeing participating and who are you not seeing participating? And ask your group of diverse leaders why that might be, right? So that's a place where those conversations can happen, and in a way that really is responsive to their peers, right? And measuring those outcomes. So even looking at how you can diversify your leadership among your students, I think is a critical, you know, starting point, and really kind of a lab or an opportunity for them to have these discussions as they are providing these activities and seeing who's engaged, who's not, and why, and what do we need to do to change that.
I think it also goes back to this notion of when we look at teachers, I mean, keep focusing on the students, right? We focus on all students, right? We want every student to succeed, but that may look different for some students than other students. And sometimes the majority of those students that it looks different for are your minority students. So if you're focusing on, we want everyone to succeed, I feel like teachers went into education for a reason, because they care about kids. So if you just focus on that, I think it's sometimes a little bit easier for them to be able to understand where you're coming from.
And this next question is, how do we help students of different cultures or ethnicities feel comfortable in school?
By allowing them to be themselves.
By accepting who they are, by trying to get to know them and not being afraid. I think that's probably the biggest thing. I think people like sometimes don't know what to say. Like if I'm like the only Hispanic one there, it's like, just come and talk to me. If you want to know something about my culture, I'm more than happy to share. And it goes the same way for me. Like, you know, the more I get to know different cultures, I want to know. I just keep asking questions, and maybe it's annoying to ask a lot of questions, but you also learn a lot from people by asking them questions. So I think letting your students, getting to know them and accepting them for who they are, I think it's so important. I will also say there's Ingrid Andromedis. I always say her last name wrong. She's also a minority administrator. She's done such a great job at the high school. She had a night where she had a lot of the girls dress up in their quinceañera dresses. And, you know, in the Hispanic culture, a quinceañera is a really big deal. It's like, you know, welcome to adulthood. I don't know. My daughter had a quinceañera, and then she asked me if she can date, and I'm like, no. So I don't even know, but I mean, it's a tradition that we try to keep alive. And Ingrid did such a nice job having the girls dress up. She even involved other students that were not minorities to come to that night, and they asked the girls to dance. It was a really, really sweet thing. And I think it was really successful to making those somebody with a different culture or ethnicity really stand out and highlighted. So I thought that was a great thing on her part.
So I know you just clicked, and you can leave it on that one. The only thing I would say is I want to add one thing that just came to my mind. It just popped in. Whatever you do in your schools, make sure you're not doing it alone. Make sure that you're involving as many other people as you can to help move the work forward. So helping students of different cultures or ethnicities feel comfortable in school is not the responsibility of just the principal in the building. It's the responsibility of all the adults in the building. It's the responsibility of all of the students in the building. It's the responsibility of the community. So think of ways of how you can bring stakeholders to your table, because you're the leader. So you're the one that leads the table. You're the one that makes the invitations to the table. How do you bring people, the right people to the table in order for more than just one person or one group of people to be moving this forward? When you're the leader, you've got to think with that kind of lens of how can I share this leadership so that more people are responsible or bought into it or accepting of it, and we can move this work together. If you try to do this by yourself, you're going to burn out.
I agree.
Can I add to that too? Thank you for bringing that up, Belinda. You're either going to burn out, or when you leave, it's going to die. So, you know, putting it into a system where it functions and flows is important. I also, you know, there's a part of us, leadership, administrators of color, is that sometimes people will think that we have a personal agenda that we want to drive based on what we look like, right? And that we're hyper focused on that. And then it kind of clouds the message that we're presenting. So would you agree with that?
Yes, it does.
Anna, Belinda? And so having a collaborative group working together, there are different perspectives, even where our audience can identify with different representation and hear what it is that we're trying to get across. So, you know, that part too, I think we're most sensitive to that. when we are trying to, drive or provide a safe space for each of our students.
I also think it's really important that I know that maybe we might have other people watching that are not minority administrators, but maybe are going into administration. Don't feel like you can't be the one that also does these things. Just because you don't speak the language or there's a language barrier, it actually means a lot to the parents to see you there, standing in front of them. And even if you say hola, or you say it in English and you have someone translate, like it means a lot to them. The worst thing that you can possibly do is have somebody else do it and you're like, you don't even show up. Like really, it's a team effort here. If you don't speak the Spanish or you don't speak the language of whatever meeting that you're holding, make sure that somebody does speak the language, but make sure you're there and you're interacting with parents. Like a smile and a handshake, or I mean, not a handshake right now, but a smile and an elbow tap goes a really long way.
With time, that is all we have right now. So I just want to thank the panelists so much for coming and being able to answer all of our questions so diligently.